Hit that. All right, everybody on Facebook and Zoom, we're going to hold for just one moment and make sure that we're up and running and that everybody is seeing what we're doing so we don't have to duplicate our introduction. So just bear with us for a second. All right, it looks like we are up and live on Facebook. This is Jeff Martin with Magic City Books here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So thrilled to have you here as part of our ongoing virtual author event series, which we have been doing since April of 2020. And I think I need to do the numbers because I keep thinking we're close, but we're about at our 200th author event, virtual author event in that time. And we've talked to some amazing people. We've had huge variety. You know, we're doing fiction, nonfiction, cookbooks, politics, sex, religion, all the stuff you're not supposed to talk about, everything else in between. And it's been a great way to stay connected with you, our audience, and also meet new people. You know, one of the great benefits of this virtual world that we're living in is you may not be in Tulsa, you may not be in Oklahoma, but we can still connect with you, whether you're in New York or Des Moines, Iowa, or anywhere in between. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching. We're very excited about tonight's event. A lot of fun stuff coming up. I won't give you the full rundown, but I would encourage you to go to our website, magiccitybooks.com. 1 week from today, though, I will make note of one. We're doing an event with Louise Erdrich and Ann Patchett in conversation. So that's going to be a really special evening next Tuesday. So if you go to our website, you can see some information about that. And then this Thursday, just on November 4th, we're going to be talking with the great Gary Steingart, who I actually heard on Fresh Air with Terry Gross today. And I think our interview will be even better than that, which is, you know, maybe not true. Good to say it. So hard to beat Terry Gross, but pay attention to all that stuff coming up. This is a fun thing tonight because it's a little bit of a kind of like a part due. It's a reuniting, and it feels so good. It's one of those kind of situations. Back in February of 2021, which seems like 5 years ago now, we got to do an event for Madeleine Henry's book, The Love Proof, and the moderator for that event was an author named Tracey Garvis Graves, and lo and behold, we got an opportunity to do an event this fall for a wonderful new book called Heard It in a Love Song, which is not a biography of the Marshall Tucker Band, but a wonderful book that has kind of all the bits and pieces of the human existence that you would like to have: the love, the hate, the crying, the laughing, the music, and all the kind of joyful things. And so many things actually looking at the book that we've kind of been missing in this era of isolation and COVID. And I think that one of the great things about the book is the kind of all the feels a little bit that we've been missing. And I think it's quite kind of I don't know, kind of a hug of a sorts, if a book can give you a hug. So I think that's one of the great things about it. But when we were thinking about moderators, we thought, you know, what if we get the band back together, to use a term that's kind of apropos to tonight's evening, and Madeleine and Tracey were so kind to join us again and flip roles. You know, this is like in those, you know, in old Shakespeare would switch roles in that, and take on each other's things. So they're gonna be in conversations. Encourage you guys to be part of this conversation too. Ask questions while we're going. If something pops into your mind, drop that into the Q&A or on Facebook. You can drop your questions there and we'll pull some of those in as well. So here's what Madeleine has said about Heard It in a Love Song. It says, it's a moving novel about the resilience of hope and love. It's full of humor, warmth, and depth. Those are the kind of thing we've been missing for the last 18 months. And it's pure magic on the page. You know, magic is something we know a little bit about here at Magic City Books. So thrilled to have these two with us tonight. And I'm going to turn it over and enjoy you guys take this over. So Madeleine, Tracey, thank you for joining us. Really excited about tonight's event. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And it is a real honor to be here with you tonight, Tracey, to talk about your new book and your 9th release, Heard It in a Love Song. I am such a fan of your work, going back to your debut on the island. So I have a ton of questions, and I'll be keeping an eye on the chat throughout our conversation. So if anyone has questions for Tracey, please feel free to drop them in the chat as we go. And I'll do my best to ask them, but I'll also break for questions a couple of times. So getting right into it, Tracey, I really loved this book. The characters are complex, there's great banter, but the story is also still so full of depth. And this is the best second chance at love story I have ever read. So my first question is, for people who are not familiar with the book, since it comes out next week, how would you frame what this book is about?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Madeleine, for moderating for me tonight. It is really fun to be back at Magic City Books in a completely different role this time. And to answer your question, at its heart, this book is really about two people who have found themselves on the other side of relationships. They're both recently either divorced or separated, and they have this whole kind of blank slate in front of them. I do put more focus and emphasis on the female character, on the heroine's journey, because I write contemporary women's fiction, and so I want to give that more attention. But both characters really have to figure out how they want their life to look now. What kinds of things are important to them? What are they looking for? What mistakes do they not want to repeat? And also, how do they feel their need for companionship and to maybe allay some of the loneliness they feel without really diving in headfirst into something right away. So it's a very slow burn kind of second chance at love, friends to lovers kind of story. But again, most of the emphasis is on the heroine and her getting back to some of the things that used to bring her a lot of joy.
Amazing. And several early reviews of Heard It in a Love Song mentioned that it's a feel-good story, low on angst and unnecessary drama. So was that an intentional choice? And if so, what were your reasons for going in that direction?
It was an intentional choice. I have always kind of avoided over-the-top drama and angst in all of my books, because a lot of times it just feels a little gimmicky to me. Like, if we automatically think, oh, that this is something that's going to happen, that's kind of over the top, I like to go in a different direction where we just don't go there. Not that there's anything wrong with a lot of conflict in a story, but I just really wanted it to be as realistic as possible. I didn't want to have just a lot of unnecessary drama. Secondly, I was at the heart of the drafting process during the height of the pandemic, or I should say the height of the beginning of the pandemic, which was such an uncertain time. It was in March of 2020, and I was really in the thick of drafting this book, and then was continuing to write a big portion of it through March, April, and May. And that was at a time when we collectively as a nation and across the world didn't really know what was happening with COVID. Everything felt very uncertain. So it will always be known to me as my COVID book, the book that I wrote during a time when everything in my external life was subjected to something I had never seen before. Just the onslaught of news and the kind of gloom and doom. People coined the phrase doom scrolling. There was a lot of news to catch up on and watch every day, and things were changing. So it was really, I think this book was about as full of drama and angst as it was comfortable for me to be able to do and create at the same time, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a really interesting story behind the story. Without spoiling anything, the book structure delves deeply into the pasts of both main characters. So what was your reasoning for telling the story in this way?
I really like backstory. I really like letting the reader discover on their own what it is about the character's past and how those things are affecting their actions in the present. So I don't dislike flashbacks, but I really like taking more than just a couple lines of a brief flashback, where the character's kind of summarizing something that happened. I wanted to show their lives before they met each other. And structurally, that was difficult because I had to make sure that each of the sections of the past that we were exploring for Layla and Josh, I wanted it to tie into something that was also happening in the present. So I wanted to show the reader this is something that had happened, and then we go back to the present and it's Layla and Josh, and I wanted to be able to show how they were taking those things from their past and really keeping them in mind as they start to navigate and go forward toward their future. So structurally, it was really difficult. I feel like I had about 8 or 9 sections of the past for each character that had to be dropped in at just a certain time. And it was also difficult figuring out how to do that without making it too hard for the reader. And we ended up going with the italics sections to be able to signify when we were going into the past, which might not have been the way that I would have always chosen to do it, but for this particular book, that worked the best.
And I thought reading it, it's very seamless. Like the past to the present is woven beautifully.
Thank you.
So, of course. So this book is written in a dual point of view. And I'm wondering, what is the hardest part about writing characters of the opposite sex?
Oh, I have been struggling with that since my debut novel On the Island, when I had to write in the point of view of a 17-year-old boy and then age him up and make sure that I stayed true to his point of view. And I've written dual point of view in all of my books except for one. It's always difficult. It's always hard. I always want to make sure that I am true to all of the characters. And I don't want to write male characters the way women think that male characters would act or speak, because that's a criticism you hear so much in fiction when a man is trying to write a woman. We want to write our characters in the way that they would be authentically showing up on the page. It's difficult. I have been known to poll the men in my life to ask them, is this realistic? Is this how you would say it? Is this, am I on the wrong track here? Should I do something different? So it's difficult. And also, one of the things that's the most difficult about writing dual point of view is trying to make sure that the voices are both distinct. You really don't want your characters to kind of lapse into sounding like each other. So, and that's difficult.
Absolutely. I really admire the challenge of that. I actually now have a question about names. So you have such seamless but strong names for your characters in this story. And I'm thinking about Layla Hilding and Josh Summers. I know different authors select their names differently, but there's usually an interesting method or thought behind them. So how do you select the names for your characters?
Oh, I love this question because naming characters is one of my favorite things. So one of the first things I do when I'm drafting a book, once I get the characters named, that's how I know that the idea is going to stick. That I've named the characters, we're doing this, we're telling this story. The first thing I do is find out what year the characters would have been born. Based on the year I'm writing the book, how old they are, okay, what's their birth year? Then I go to the baby naming websites and I Google what was the most popular name for the year they were born. And then I get the top 10 of both boys and girls names. And then I kind of look through it and I decide if that name is something that would match what I'm looking for. And then I narrow it down from there. So I try really hard not to, if I'm writing a character who was born in the 70s, I don't pick a name that's super popular in the early 2000s. I know that that's probably not going to be a name that would have been chosen. And sometimes it is. I mean, you can have names that are all over the board. So that's the first thing I do. Secondly, I have started using names of people I went to high school with or friends of mine. And I usually announce it on my personal Facebook page that, hey, this book has, I went to high school in Johnston and we were the Johnston Dragons. So I'll say, hey, there's some dragons in this book. You're going to have to wait till I've got an arc to show you all before you know if I chose your name. And they really, my friends and family and people I went to high school with really like that. And then specifically in this book, I named the main character Layla, which most people are going to think of the iconic song by Eric Clapton, Derek and the Dominoes, actually, and they're going to think of Layla, and they're going to be like, oh, I bet her parents were musical too, and they named her Layla. But in the book, we find out that Layla is actually named after her dad's sister, who passed away from meningitis when she was younger. And so one of the reasons I liked that juxtaposition is because when the heroine Layla meets her ex-husband for the first time, which you see all of that in the past chapters, he asks her, like most people do, oh, were you named after the song? And she's telling him this whole thing about how she was actually named, and he really rudely cuts her off because the girl that he's also seeing is about to walk out the door. So he just rudely cuts her off and leaves to go chase after this other girl. So she doesn't get to finish explaining. And that right there is so indicative of the type of person we're going to see that he later on shows himself to be. And then contrast that with the first time Josh asks her about her name and she gets to tell him the whole thing this time. So little things like that. I thought, well, she's a guitar player, she's a musician. That'd be kind of cool to give her a name that people are going to automatically think is one thing, but it actually is not that thing at all.
Wow. I love that method of looking up the baby names. It's so authentic, but I've never heard it before. That's really interesting. So This is a question about audience. I think a lot of people can relate to this story, even if they're not literally dating after divorce, in the sense that love doesn't always go the way you think it should, and love in real life is very complicated. So that being said, I'm wondering, who do you think is the target audience for this book?
I think the target audience is anyone who has ever been in a relationship that, like you said, didn't work out, didn't end up being the way they thought it was going to be, and then asks themselves, what now? Are they filled with self-doubt? What is it that I did wrong? Is there something wrong with me? Should I even try to do this again? Or if they were the one that ended the relationship, I think there's a tendency to doubt ourselves then, even going forward, even if we were the one that ended it. Well, what did we do to start a relationship with this person, and how come that didn't work out? What can I learn about myself, and how can I take that into my next relationship? So whether or not it's a different choice you want to make, whether or not it's maybe just a different way that you want the relationship to go, maybe you need somebody who's more emotionally available, maybe you need somebody who gives you a little bit more space. But I think anytime a significant relationship ends, it doesn't matter if you were married or if it was just a long-term relationship, I think there's that tendency to try to figure out, oh gosh, okay, I'm back to square one. How am I going to navigate this? What do I want it to look like?
Wow, yeah, and that doesn't just have to be romantic. That can happen in several realms.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So tell us about your love of music and how it inspired the story. Are you musical? Can you play an instrument, sing, or write music?
I love music. I would rather have music on than the TV anytime. I hardly ever turn my TV on. I have to have music on, except when I'm writing. I don't write with music on, but a lot of times when I'm just trying to think up an idea for a book, or I'm working on a book idea in my head, that kind of pre-writing, I will take long drives and listen to music, or long walks and listen to music. And a lot of times it just kind of creatively inspires me. It's really a mood lifter for me. I'm somebody that just always feels better when I have music on. And so when I started thinking about a creative outlet for my heroine, something that she gave up when she was married that she wants to get back to and rediscover. And since I am someone who has to have a creative outlet, obviously I'm a writer, I have to write, it makes me feel really good and I enjoy it. And I was thinking to myself, what would I do if I had to give up something that I love so much? And then she finds herself on this other side of the relationship with this whole, again, blank slate ahead of her. What does she want to do to get back to who she was before? So music just gave me a really nice segue into something that she could do. She could recapture, as we see in the past chapters, that was something that was really important to her. And that performing made her feel, it gave her a sense of worth. I mean, she did enjoy the crowd and the response to her. They treated her like a rock star in Rochester, Minnesota, in this very popular band, and she loved it. And she was very talented. And so I thought it would be really neat just watching this female character go and almost go back to square one with experiencing it, starting off by buying a guitar and setting up a little music studio in her basement where she could just play for the sheer joy of playing.
Yeah, and that exhilaration of performance really comes through in the story. It's not something I personally enjoy, but I felt like I could vicariously through her. So I love that. And yes. So now I have to ask, since this is your 9th release, how is this book different from your prior novels, and how is it similar?
Well, so the tagline that I use on my website, or when people ask me what kind of books I write, I always give them my tagline, which is contemporary fiction with a happily ever after. And this is something that I probably talk about the most, because I think it's the thing I worry about sometimes. Is I love contemporary women's fiction and I love romance, but I like to smash them together and take my favorite parts of both of those genres, categories, however you want to think about it. And so every book that I've ever written is always going to have a central conflict that the heroine is more involved in than the hero. She wants something, she's having trouble getting it, she's encountering some roadblocks. It's something that's very important to her as a woman, whether it's a focus on her career or family or whatever it is that's important to her. I want the bulk of the book to be focused on how she goes about trying to get back to her center or whatever it is that she's lacking. But I also like to have a really nice romance as a complement to whatever it is that she is searching for or working toward, because I love romance and I love love stories and I love happily ever afters. So I always figure if the heroine has to go through something really hard to get what she wants, it's even nicer if there's maybe a really swoony guy there at the end with her. So that's how I would describe it.
Wonderful thought. And I'd just like to remind anyone, if they do have any questions for Tracey about this book, other books or writing, please feel free to put them in the chat. And as we mentioned, Tracey and I, we did an event here together in February when you referenced a kind of pressure in writing books. So to pick up on that, did you feel any pressure when it came to this story? And if so, why?
I felt an incredible amount of pressure. The reason I felt so much pressure with this book, and it is a position that I have been in before, but The Girl He Used to Know featured a character who was on the autism spectrum. And so that was a book that was not only very difficult to write, but it was a book that a lot of people wrote to me afterwards, after reading it, to say that they were so happy to see someone like Annika represented in fiction, and how much they just really enjoyed seeing something like that. And the problem is that when you write a book with a very unique character like that, you can't turn around and just duplicate it in the next book. And I experienced this after On the Island. I wrote this crazy idea, frankly, about these two people stranded on a desert island, and it ended up working out far better than I had ever anticipated or even wished that it would. But following up something like that, and On the Island, and to maybe a much smaller extent, The Girl He Used to Know, are both what I would call higher concept books. So they had a big idea of some sort. And then when you go to write your next book, it's really difficult because everybody wants another big idea, or write that again, but not that, but different, but that. And so it's tough, and you get a lot of input, and one of the things that I'm still working on as an author and a creator is trying to really protect my creative space and where my ideas come from, so that the next book is the idea that I want to write and not the idea that came from kind of a committee of people weighing in, because that's, for me, the quickest way for my creativity to start hiding from me. And I don't want that. So this was difficult. This was a very difficult one to follow up. And I don't do a lot of sequels or a lot of series or anything like that. So pretty much when I start out to write another book, we're going back to the drawing board. We have a brand new premise, brand new characters. And I've been saying since my first book that I don't ever want to duplicate myself. I don't want anybody to ever feel like when they pick up one of my books that they're reading the same story over and over. So I'm making it hard on myself.
Yeah, well, keeping it interesting for your readers.
Yes.
So I actually have a question from the audience, which ties into what I wanted to ask you about next. And so Jim wanted to know, in general, do you write the same amount each day or week, or go through bouts of creative intensity that speeds up the process, which relates to my question about what is your writing process like?
So my writing process usually begins with me, just like I said a minute ago, drilling down to the idea that really excites me, that I know I want to spend a lot of time with and that I want to write. And then I let my brain work on that for sometimes up to a month or so. I take those car rides, I take those long walks, I listen to music, and I let my brain just kind of turn over what I'm thinking about and start sending me some things. And then I start jotting those things down. So could be just an idea, could be a scrap of dialogue, could be anything. I write it down because I never know if I'm going to need it later. And then once I get to the point where I have enough to start drafting, the first few days or week or so is kind of uncomfortable because I don't have any structure at all. I'm not even really sure where my chapter breaks are going to be, but I just kind of start writing. I do always know my beginning, general, middle, and end. I never start writing unless I know those three things, because I will just sit there and stare at a blank page. So that's what my process is kind of like. Once I get into what I feel like is a real cruising kind of altitude, I shoot for 2,000 words a day. And I could get the 2,000 words done in 45 minutes, or I could take all day to get them done. It really just depends. The book I'm writing right now has been coming out faster than I can keep up with it. So if I'm walking and something starts popping into my brain, I've been using my voice to text a lot on my notepad on my phone.
Oh, wow.
And I'll just start talking into it, and I can talk really fast and I can get it all down. So it's just, I mean, I don't know about your process, Madeleine, if part of your process is like mine, but it's really messy until it's not. Until we kind of straighten out and we start to get a little bit of a structure going, and then we start having all of our chapters, and so I can start searching by chapter heading and that kind of thing. And then it just kind of keeps expanding. It's this document that just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it gets unwieldy, and then I have to wrestle it a little bit, and then eventually we get a book.
Well, actually, that has inspired another question from Rana, who is already wanting to know if you can share anything about your next book. So not the book coming out next week, but the next one.
Unfortunately, I cannot share anything about that one yet. I don't think my publisher would be very happy with me, because we really need to focus on this one first. But the minute I am able to, I sure will.
And one last question about your process from the audience. Christina wants to know, do you proof and edit as you write, or do you just get it all out there and save the edits for later?
I am an incredibly messy drafter. I try to do very little revision work, polishing. I mean, I will make sure that I don't have misspelled words and that my punctuation is all in the right place, but I really try to just get that story down. That first draft is me telling the story to myself. So I try not to slow myself down. Also, there's no room to start letting self-doubt creep in. That doesn't help either. So the faster I can and get the story down, the first draft down, then when everything's on the page, you know, one of the things that authors hear all the time is you can't revise a blank page, you can't edit a blank page. So I get it all down. And then my reward for getting to the end of the first draft is that I get to go back and tackle my favorite part of the whole process, which is that second draft where you can start revising. Because so much comes to you during that first messy draft, things I didn't even know. There's so many surprises. Characters will tell me something. My brain will send me an idea, or, hey, you know what you should do here. So I just love that process. So I try to immerse myself in that and not worry about revisions at that point.
Wow, you can't revise a blank page. That's wisdom. Okay, so since we're talking about your artistic process, what would you say is the most difficult part?
I would say right now, almost 10 books in, the most difficult part is protecting my idea. Making sure that I let the idea grow. And when I say let the idea grow, it's either going to grow or I'm going to discard it. But I need enough time by myself, letting my brain kind of work on it, to know whether or not it's a viable idea. If I get somebody into that process too soon, it can kind of squash an idea before I've had a chance to let that idea grow into something. And I always tell people about On the Island is a perfect example. It was my first novel. I'd never written a novel before, ever. It was a bucket list item to see if I could cross off. I told so few people about that as I was writing it, because I just didn't want, and first of all, it does have a premise that is a little bit of a shocker if you just read the back of the book and think, what is this book about? But I just didn't want anybody's eyes to widen when I told them about it. And I just kept it to myself. And that's something that's worked out really well for me ever since. I don't want to workshop ideas with anyone. I just have to get to a point where I'm like, yep, this is what I'm writing and I love it, before I bring somebody else into the process.
Interesting. So that relates to a question I was hoping to ask about if you share your work before it's published. I know different authors, some share very widely, like Jill Santopolo, the author of Everything After. You have an event with her on Thursday. Yep. She shares her work widely before it's published with her writing group. I only show my agent. I feel like if there's a problem, I'm only going to be the one who knows how to fix it. Where do you fall in that spectrum? Do you share it at all before it's published?
I have beta readers, and I used to have a lot more beta readers than I have now, but even my beta readers don't get a copy of the manuscript until I have made my revisions until I've polished. Basically, I don't show it to my betas until it is at the point where I can't do anything more without some sort of feedback. Like I've done everything I possibly can. And I've cut down on the number of beta readers that I now use because I found at one point, and this is just how it works for me personally, too many cooks in the kitchen can get stressful. And I always look at beta feedback as if I have more than one beta with the same feedback, I know that I need to look at it, because if two people have the same thoughts about something that I'm writing, then okay, I need to look at it. If just one of the beta readers has a problem with something or likes something a lot but doesn't like something, this, if they're just depending upon what it is, if there's only one beta saying it, then I have to look at it and think to myself, okay, Tracey, are they right? Were you trying to cut a corner here? Because sometimes I know, I'm like, yeah, okay, I know. I had a feeling that was going to come up. You're right. So I just don't use as many beta readers as I used to. And now that I'm with St. Martin's and working on my third book with them, a lot more of that is shared with my editor. So I do a lot more back and forth with my editor versus my agent, because I've never really shared a lot with my agent, because I did come to publishing from the self-publishing sides. And I think that's part of it. But my editor and I have a really, really good relationship. So a lot of times we will verbally workshop something. Like I'll be like, okay, this is what I'm doing, I'm not sure. And she'll say, well, just keep going and then we'll take a look at it. So I do work more closely with her, which kind of eliminates the need for a lot more outside feedback from beta readers or even my author peers.
Wow. I love that you're really discerning with the early feedback. That's very interesting. So how long on average does it take you to write a book?
I am a little bit quicker now that I've done it for this many books. It used to be a solid year, but now I can do it in about 6 months, as long as I have a strong idea. And then I do quite a bit of outlining. I like using a beat sheet. So I will often use Blake Snyder's Save the Cat beat sheet, which is it's a really helpful way of kind of breaking down all of the different beats in the story. So about 6 months, 6 to 8 months, depending upon if we're talking about, going to copy edits, or if we're talking about turning in the draft, or the manuscript to my editor. So 6 to 8 months.
Interesting. And so I'd like to bring up a very heated and controversial topic for writers, which is writer's block. So do you believe in writer's block?
I didn't used to, but now I do. But with the caveat that I don't think it's necessarily writer's block. For me, what I've determined is it's not writer's block, it's writer's fear. If I am having trouble writing, it's probably because I have let outside influences get into my creative space. I've started turning up the volume on that inner editor that's telling me that this isn't very good. You probably should find something else to do for a career, because this is just, I don't know why you thought sometimes those voices really have to be turned down or completely off, and it's hard sometimes. So that's just kind of how it is for me. I just have to really kind of protect that space. If I am having writer's block, the first thing I ask myself is, what are you afraid of? What is worrying you? Are you worried that you can't do justice to the scene? Why don't you just write it? Why don't you just write it and then you can fix it later? Because self-doubt can really affect the creative process. So again, not so much writer's block, but writer's fear or writer's doubt.
Wow, I've never heard it phrased like that before. I wrote that down, keeping that with me. And so once again, this is just a friendly reminder that if anyone has any questions for Tracey, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll make sure that they get answered. So I wanted to tell you, Tracey, one of my favorite lines in your book, Heard It in a Love Song. And it stayed with me since I read an early copy of this last year. And the line is, the music business is not for the faint of heart. And I love that line because to me, it captures something counterintuitive. And the idea is that you have to have a lot of sensitivity to go into the arts, but it takes an equal amount of strength to stick with them and to survive along within them. So that's just what I saw, but I'm wondering, what did that line mean to you? And more broadly, does anything about Layla's experience as an artist resonate with you as an author of fiction?
You know, that's an excellent question, because I think it is so difficult when you are someone who works in a creative field. You want to make art, you want to create because it makes you feel good, you want to create because you have to. You know, writers write because they have to write. I would imagine that for singers and songwriters or anybody in any of those fields, they have a lot of what writers have. They have that need for creative expression that manifests in their performing and in their music. But publishing is not an industry that is known for its ease in entering. It's got a very high barrier to entry. So you get this juxtaposition between your need and desire to create, but then you have a business that is designed to keep you out from doing the very thing that you want to do. And so as artists, I think we think to ourselves, okay, well, I don't need that because I can create. It doesn't matter if I can sell it or if anybody will hire me. But Layla experienced that, and I think writers all experience that when we are trying to break into the industry. We want to create, but we also want other people to consume what we have created. And I cannot imagine what it would be like to try and break into the music industry. And I think it would be very difficult. It's difficult for everybody, but I think women have some additional challenges. And Layla found that out firsthand when she tried to meet with some radio and some music executives and wanted to try to get a recording contract, and just found that it wasn't really about the music at all. It was about her look and what they could mold her into. And I did a lot of research when I was writing the book about how people like Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears were first treated when they broke into the music industry, and they kind of created these pop icons out of them. So I think it's really difficult for creative people, no matter what industry they're in. If you are creative, eventually you do want people to consume what you've created, but there's a whole business aspect of it that is not necessarily always going to be, it's going to be at odds sometimes with the creative process.
Yeah, I mean, there are just so many parallels to me between the businesses.
Yeah.
So I really loved your characters in this story, especially Layla and Josh. And I think it's rare to find characters who are so realistically vulnerable and struggling in a way where they can sort of get by. It's very honest. And I'm curious, in writing characters who feel so real, did they come to you fully formed, or did they get more clear as you work on them? And what do you think makes for a great character?
Well, one of the things I hope people notice in all of my books is that I do try to write characters who are as realistic as possible. Again, that kind of goes back to my books not being high on angst or drama. I really, really like the realistic aspects of relationships. All of my books focus on relationships and the things that happen in the relationship, the things that the characters have to compromise on and fight against. And what is it, how do they have to make this relationship so that it works? How do they make it work for both of them? How do they make it work so that the heroine is continuing to get what it is she's working toward? So I just, a lot of the realism that I hope I bring to my characters comes from not just my own life, but just my own observations of people around me. I think writers are generally pretty observant people. So I pay close attention. I don't tend to write super autobiographically, but a lot of times when I'm writing about something in a book, somebody I know has gone through something similar, or maybe I've just seen a news story, or maybe I've read an article and something in the human behavior of the people in the article or whatever it is that I've watched or consumed kind of stands out to me. And then I see if I can work that into my characters. I do want them to come off the page as sort of a realistic representation of what they're going through.
I think that was definitely achieved. And there is an important announcement from Fawners from Phoenix, who wants to let you know that your friends and family are so proud of you and you look so beautiful and they love the book.
That is one of my
I just needed. And we have another question from the audience, again from Rana. Did you have any input for the great cover?
Real quick, thank you, Connors. That is one of my very best friends calling in from or viewing from Phoenix tonight. I love you, Stephanie. The cover was actually, I did not have any input whatsoever into the cover. but I will tell you that I did cry when I saw it for the first time. I didn't start bawling, but I just teared up because it was so absolutely how I saw Layla in my head. That, and I didn't give, like when we were doing the cover for The Girl Who Used to Know, they asked me if I had any images or anything in mind. And so I sent a couple things. I didn't have anything. I had zero input for this. I absolutely loved it. It's beautiful. It reminded me a little bit of the movie poster for Almost Famous with Kate Hudson starring in it, the glasses and kind of, I just absolutely loved it. And this is a funny little thing. My dad wanted to know for the second time if it was me on the cover. And I'm like, no, that they're not putting me on the cover, Dad. That is definitely not me. He thought I was on the island, on the island cover as well. And I was like, no, I think you're looking at it through dad lens, because this is not me on the front. But it's just, I just love the colors, the flowers. I just love everything about it.
Absolutely. And it's such a subtle cover, the tie-dye in the background. It's really beautiful.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering about your relationships with your readers. How do you like to interact with readers? And I know Taylor Jenkins Reid in her blurb for this book says she can't get enough of you. I know there are a bunch of readers who feel the same way. So how can they get more of you in their lives?
I'm really active on Instagram. So I do converse a lot with my readers on Instagram. I'm not as present on Facebook as I used to be. On my author page, I don't know, a lot of people just don't seem to be using the author pages the way they used to 4 and 5 years ago. But people can always email me, they can direct message me, they can direct message me on Instagram, they can send me a private message through my author page. Really just any kind of conversation starter. If I post a story to Instagram and they want to leave a comment, then we can get a conversation going back and forth. But yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. I'm not super active on Twitter either, but Instagram is definitely a place where I enjoy spending time and hanging out with my readers and having conversations.
Wonderful. And so we have another question from the audience, which ties into something that I wanted to ask you as well. So Natasha wants to know, are you able to read other books while you're deep into constructing your story? And if so, what genre or author?
No, it's hard for me to read when I am in the middle of the drafting process. And it just kind of depends what part of the drafting process I'm in. At the very beginning, when I'm still just telling that first messy draft, writing that messy draft for myself, I try not to read. However, I can read nonfiction and memoirs. That doesn't seem to have any kind of negative impact on my own creative voice. I don't want to write something that's really similar. I don't want to read something in the same genre or category that I write, because I want to make sure that it's my voice. And so usually I don't read a lot when I'm in that certain part of the drafting process, other than memoir and nonfiction.
Wow. Okay, so I have a big question. It's a bold question, but I'm very curious. What does literary success look like for you?
For me, literary success is to continue putting out books regularly and to continue have readers who are excited about that. That is literally, that is the definition of literary success for me. I want to keep doing what I'm doing, and I want people, when they hear there's a new Tracey Garvis Graves book coming out, I want them to be excited about that book and to want to read that book. And that's all I need.
And so what do you love most about being an author, and what do you struggle with?
I love the creative process the most, because that is something that when it's going really well, it's just pure joy. It is just the best feeling. And I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, Madeleine, when you're having a good writing day and everything's clicking and you just feel wonderful. And I don't want to stop doing that. The hardest part of the process, and I feel like I keep going back to this same thing, but it's protecting the idea, making sure that I'm not coming from a place of, okay, I have to come up with an idea right now and I have to tell my editor or my agent or even, my friends about it. And then I have to write it and I have to hurry, and I have to keep telling myself to just settle down. There's no hurry. Just go back to letting the idea come to you and enjoying the creative process. So that's the hard part, though. The hard part is that we work in a business where we want to have content. And I think everybody would be happy with more books, more, faster. Let's have more titles more frequently. So trying to get a good balance of that so that it still fits in my creative process is the thing that I probably struggle with the most.
Interesting. And so picking up on the topic of reading as an author, what was your favorite book from childhood? And are there any other books that have significance for you?
So my favorite book from childhood is The Monster at the End of This Book, which is a Grover book. I remember that from my childhood, and then I bought a copy of it and I read that to my own children. And I absolutely I have it. It's in the bookcase behind me, but I wouldn't be able to just pull it right out. Otherwise I would. If I thought I could, I would. So that was a really big book for me as a child. And then the book that I've talked about before that probably has had the biggest impact on me is Stephen King's The Stand, that my dad bought for me when I think I was 12. He bought The Stand and The Shining, which were not really age appropriate for a 12-year-old, but he probably just saw them on the end cap. And I had loved reading from a very early age, so books were always a natural gift for me. But I still have that copy of Stephen King's The Stand. It was a mass market paperback, and that was the first book I can remember reading and really being gripped by the sheer talent of the writer. And even though I don't read a lot of I'm gonna make a liar out of myself. I'm listening to 11/22/63 by Stephen King right now on audiobook, but I went through a big Stephen King phase, but The Stand will always stand out to me because it's just incredible storytelling. And I remember that's probably the earliest inclination that I ever thought to myself, I want to do that someday. I want to write.
Wow, that's really inspirational. So picking up on the idea of literary success, for some people, it would maybe be to have their novel adapted. And so I know that your first book, On the Island, is in development to be a feature film by MGM. So I'm curious, what has the adaptation process been like for you so far, and how involved will you be?
The adaptation process has been frustrating because it's been 10 years. It's been in development for 10 years. So we've gotten as far as the script, and honestly, it's just, there's nothing happening right now. So the hard thing about novel adaptations is it's easy to get some interest from Hollywood, but the hard part is the crucial steps that have to be taken for the project to become an actual movie. And that for us would look like an actor or an actress or a high-level director signing up, wanting to become involved in the project. That's what it would take to go to the next step in the process. So there really isn't anything at all for me at this stage of the involvement. I'm just hoping that someday we can see the story on the big or little screen. I've been really excited and optimistic about how many books are being adapted for Netflix and Hulu and Amazon for the streamers. I think On the Island would be awesome in that format. And especially with COVID and the movie industry, the film industry really taking some hard hits, and theaters not being someplace where people have been going for the last 18 months. So I'm hoping that someday someone makes it into a movie or a TV show or something. I don't even care what it is. And I don't have to be involved in it. And I probably wouldn't be, to be perfectly honest. Usually the writer is not really involved in the process too much, but it's kind of, it's frustrating sometimes because it has been, like I said, it's been 10 years.
Wow, that's
10
fascinating.
years.
Fascinating. So another question from the audience, Natasha wants to know, how has your writing style changed from your first book to this book?
It's kind of hard to answer that question based on the Island, because On the Island was such a strange premise, and it was a premise that really should never have worked at all. So it wasn't, and I've kind of touched on this before, it's not really the kind of book that I was going to go and try and duplicate, because it's just a premise that you get one desert island book and that's it. And sometimes not even one, because I had such a hard time letting anybody even letting me, show them the book when I was trying to query it. But I really don't know. It's just one of those things that I don't know.
Okay.
That's a
Well,
hard
then
one to
they're gonna
answer.
have to find out when they read it. So there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so getting back to Heard It in a Love Song, trust is obviously an important issue for the two main characters who are coming out of divorces. And so to set the scene for people before they go and read it themselves, what are Layla's and Josh's relationships with trust at the start of the book? And after leading marriages, how do they view love?
They view it very differently. One thing that I wanted to do with the characters is I wanted to have their prior relationships be very different from each other. In the case of Josh and his ex-wife, Kimmy, they were high school sweethearts. So they met at 18, they got married very young, and they were together for a long time. I mean, they grew up together. They were together for 20 years. So Josh doesn't know anything else. He knows how to meet a girl in high school and marry her and have a child with her, and then grow eventually into two different people and separate. And he has this whole kind of different way of looking at life. Layla's marriage was not very good. It was she married somebody that she later realized probably wasn't best for her, probably didn't bring anything to the relationship that allowed her to grow. Quite the opposite, sort of stifled her creative performing urges and the things that used to make her so happy, and she didn't get to do them anymore. So they both have some trust issues. For Layla, she wants a man that she can trust because he's going to be honest with her, he's going to listen to her and be a true partner to her. For Josh, I don't think the issues were surrounding trust quite as much as they were him trying to figure out how to date as a grown-up, how to, after he's done all this growing up, because he and his wife kind of, like I said, they kind of grew up together. They figured things out together, and now he doesn't have that anymore. So what does he want, and what kind of woman does he want to meet? So they had some similarities in that they were both not willing to compromise. If something was important to them in a relationship, they were going to make sure that was being honored.
That's wonderful. And we have another question from the audience from Christina. I know you have adult children. Do they like to read your books, or is it awkward for them?
Well, neither of them have ever read anything I've ever written, and they swear that they are never going to, because they're like, nope, not going to read those, not ever going to read those, Mom. And that is fine with me. But a lot of my sons and daughters' friends have read the books. So I always say to my kids, well, do they talk to you then about the books? Nope, they just want me to tell you they really loved it, and that's all, Mom. So no, they don't want to read them.
Oh, interesting. But I did see in the dedication a mention of your son.
Yep.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yep, he is just as big a music lover as I am, probably more so than my daughter. Raised him on classic rock. He knows all the songs. That's what he listens to. And music is something that he and I have just definitely in common. And I've already dedicated a book to my daughter. So this was perfect for my son.
That's amazing. Okay, so I just have one more question, and then I'll take a final question from the audience if there are any more. But without giving anything away, did you know the ending when you started to write, and was there ever an alternative ending?
Yes, I knew the ending, and no, there was not an alternative.
Perfect. There you go.
I always know, and I usually stick with it.
Amazing. Well, that is all from me, and I'm not seeing any more questions in the audience at this moment. Okay. So I think that might be the end of the evening.
Okay. Do we have something in the chat?
There was one comment by Rana. I love how you write your male characters, and one great job. Those are the
thank you.
Comments. But
thank you.
So as you wrap up, Tracey, it's such an honor to be here with you. You are my definition of literary success, and I'm just really, this is a real moment for you, but also for me to be able to ask you all these questions. So thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And everyone should go by and read this book, obviously. So
Thank you, Madeleine. You are the best. You are absolutely the best. I will do an event with you anytime, no matter what side of the microphone I'm going to be on, whether I'm the moderator or you're interviewing me, anytime.
Oh, amazing. Well, thank you so much, Tracey. And thank you everyone for coming tonight.
Thanks, everybody.